Good evening, blog viewers. Today we're going to talk about the animal instincts, and this blog post, I'm making no claim to originality. Most of what's being presented here is simply a restatement of Plato's tripartite division of the soul into reason, spirit, and appetite, which we discussed many posts ago. And just to summarize, Plato again took the human soul and divided it into three parts. Reason, which is reason's function is to discover and know the truth, and give commands to the rest of the soul to act accordingly in accordance with the truth. Spirit is sort of the motivational drives that people have to excel and dominate others, or be courageous, or experience certain emotions like fear. And appetite, obviously, is many of the things that we experience by nature of being an animal. So we have bodily appetites that are basically driven by the human body, and frankly, more scientifically, you could say now, by the demands and instructions of human DNA that are within our body. Now, in a platonically just person, Plato was very clear to emphasize throughout the dialogues, reason ruled the other two parts of the soul, spirit and appetite. Reason didn't crush those two parts, but it discovered the truth and discovered the good, and in accordance with those discoveries of the truth and the good, reason gave instructions to the person's spirit, their various drives and emotions and desires to excel in different things, honor, sense of shame, all those things, fear, and gave commands to appetite, and accordingly the person lived in accordance with what reason had determined was the truth. In a platonically unjust person, reason was not fulfilling that function, but in fact spirit and appetite were basically ruling the soul, and reason was limited to basically finding ways to satisfy the appetites and satisfy spirit's demands to dominate or engage in dominant displays of power or grandeur or whatever, and competitive excellence over others. But again, in a platonically unjust person, reason, all of these decisions as to how one was acting was not in accordance with the truth, but was in accordance with the appetitive desires and spirited desires, and reason had no longer fulfilling that function of determining where the truth actually lied. Now, in today's parlance, getting out of Plato for a second, and actually before I do that, I think John Cooper in his book Reason and Emotion, this is very well brought out in several passages. On page 110 of Reason and Emotion, Cooper writes, "Temperance is the condition," summarizing Plato's views on virtue. He writes, "Temperance is the condition in which each of the three parts of the soul that we just discussed, in whatever way is possible for each, constantly recognizes and agrees that reason is entitled to rule and give direction to the operations of the soul, and consequently to provide the structure and organization of the agent's life. Justice is the condition in which each of the aspects of the soul is alert to and actively makes its own proper contribution to the active life of the person whose soul it is, while not attempting to usurp the proper function of any other such aspect." On Plato's account, being temperate means having your soul part so structured that reason knows it is to decide and rule, while spirit and appetitive desire are constantly ready to follow reason's lead without undue resistance. Now, contrast this with the platonically unjust person, where Cooper writes, "So long as wisdom is absent, spirit and appetite, it could be said, can at best be disposed to follow the specific sort of guidance provided by a specific, somewhat defective reason, not to follow reason wherever it may lead." So that is a good description of those different kinds of persons. Now, in today's parlance, you could say, or today's language, you could say that human DNA creates an organism capable of animality and living a life fully in accordance with the animal instincts, and what we could say bondage to the merely animal instincts. But DNA also creates an organism, human DNA also creates an organism that is capable of rising beyond the merely animal instincts and behaving in accordance with our other arguably better and higher instincts and motivations and values. Now, that second choice of acting beyond the merely animal instincts, that is a choice that's only possible through mind. The mind's recognition that this is, in fact, a better way to live. It can't come about any other way. It has to be a genuine, comprehensive, thought-out, elaborate, and genuine understanding by mind that a life that is beyond the animal instincts, not totally denying them, but lived and not strictly in bondage and to the animal instincts, and lived for reasons beyond the animal instincts, is the best kind of life. Only mind can make that decision. And as always, what distinguishes man and human DNA is the freedom to choose one of these different paths of how to live, and to continue refining that choice within reality as the facts and circumstances of life inevitably change, as they must. Now, so in a way we could say the mind is programmable to choose either the animal instinct life or a life that transcends the animal instincts. Now, as a program, I would say the default program for the human mind is to choose animality. But that doesn't mean that you can't self-program the mind out of animality. But I would say very few people get to that point and do it well. Now, we've been talking a lot about the merely animal instincts. These are obviously instincts that we share with other animals of any level of complexity. Bees, lions, dogs, cats, birds, zebras, anything you'd basically find at a zoo. So, what are these things? What are these merely animal instincts? And I think there's three of them. One is a survival instinct to gather food, water, and shelter from the elements. This is very closely related to an instinct to provide safety and security for oneself and one's loved ones or family from threats of nature. That is not just something we do. We build homes. We go to work to get to be able to buy groceries and stuff. But many other animals do it, not using the same means we do. But bees build hives and they gather food, or lions go and then forage and grab. Or go out and hunt and bring food back. So all these animals do these kinds of things. They're motivated by these instincts. The second instinct is to reproduce and engage in sexual activity as part of the reproductive process. That's kind of straightforward. Obviously, a species that relies on sexual reproduction can't maintain its genome and can't reproduce to the next generation if it doesn't do that. So that's obviously an instinct that needs to be satisfied. The third instinct is what I would call a dominance instinct, which is an instinct to become dominant within the species in some form or another, become dominant and known for something and admired and respected by other members of the species. Now, typically, it's only within other. One is seeking to be dominant and recognized only by other members of one species. It's not like any human out there is looking to gain the admiration of an ant. So it's that humans are doing certain activities and motivated in certain ways to gain the respect and admiration of fellow human beings. And that is the dominance instinct. Now, again, human DNA creates an organism in man that is capable of these animal instincts, capable of acting in accordance with them, and capable of what I would stress is lifelong bondage to these merely animal instincts. Now, these instincts are shared by all basically higher animals. Only the satisfaction of the first instinct, though, seems mandatory for a human to survive, or have at least a decent chance of survival. The other two are not really strictly necessary, I would say. The instinct to reproduce, the instinct to become dominant within the species. No single person has to do that in order to live. Now, another point I'd like to make is the manifestation of these instincts obviously differs as between a lion or a human and an ant and a bee, or as between many other kinds of animals. And it even differs how these instincts get manifested in behavior. Obviously differs even as between a 21st century man and a 5th century man, or several million years from now, men that'll be living many years from now, how they will act on and manifest these different instincts. There'll be differences in specific behaviors, while I would argue the core instincts are the same, and the core value of the instincts probably, the core goodness and value of the instinct probably doesn't change much over time. Now, let's see here. So each person, given that we have these animal instincts, I think it's important for each person to examine their behavior, the repetitive behaviors, honestly and non-self-deceptively, and see if one's overwhelming behavior can fit within these basic animal instincts. If I would argue, if you are motivated to using a very common fact pattern, if you're motivated to make a ton of money, have a very nice home, take a lot of great vacations, have attractive sexual partners, and be respected by your peers for your job or for some other different thing, basically you want to live the American dream. You're basically totally dominated by basic animal instincts. In that sense, without even making a value judgment of it, I would say that if you're motivated in those ways, and those are basically the extent of your motivations, your conduct within reality really is not much different from a lion or a bee. Although you may dress up your conduct with more tact and complexity, you may engage in more self-deception than a bee as to what you're actually doing and why you're doing it. You may lie to yourself about why you're doing what you're doing, or how you may lie to yourself as to how much you're dominated by these animal instincts. But regardless of all of that, if that's basically what you're doing and what you're motivated by, you're basically not much different from those other animals. And if you don't think about what you do and you just do it, and so you're not reflective enough to notice that, then I would argue you're even more animalistic, because you're acting basically on pure animal instincts without even reflecting and knowing what the hell you're doing. So in that case, I would say you're even more like animals that don't have the sort of the self-reflection and the critical thinking faculties of the mind to change behavior. So I would argue that it is important for each of us to look at our behavior and see if we are living in accordance primarily with these animal instincts. And of course, the question would be, first, the question that immediately pops up is, are these animal instincts bad? And I would say that I've struggled with this question on the blog, obviously in some of the different posts, and I think I'm getting closer to a comfortable point with this answer, in that they aren't bad per se. Of course, there's various, almost all the animal instincts you can get addicted to in some form or another, and those would be almost purely bad. But let's putting aside addiction, I would say they're not bad per se, but a life devoted largely or merely to these satisfaction of these animal instincts doesn't come very close to satisfying the extent of human potential. And I think that's the best that I can come up with as sort of a description of the value of these instincts. If you spend almost all your time and serious energy on these instincts, you're not reaching the full human potential that you have. There is some deficit or gap between what you could be and what you are, but because you're only satisfying these animal instincts. And that gap might be very large. And your life could be very, very much different and much, much improved had you reached had you reached your full human potential. So I think that's the best way to say it. So what would be then some examples of someone transcending animality? How do we get, if let's say we have someone that's looking at their behavior and they see, okay, well, I'm looking at it and I think 95 to 100% of my conduct is within animality and these animal instincts. How do I get to maybe 50%? What sorts of activities should I start doing to get myself closer to less animality? So here would be some examples. Just a few. Create some work of art for yourself, strictly for your own benefit. Or go enjoy some piece of art that some other person has drawn or done, and do it strictly for your own benefit and enjoyment. Now, importantly here, don't post this or don't publicize it in other ways on the internet or otherwise. Because if you do that, I think you're back in dominance. You're back into trying to project an image of yourself to other people as either sophisticated or artsy or whatever, and you're back into the whole dominance game. So I would just do it. And there was an example, for example, of I was reading an article about museum goers that seems to be their only purpose of going to the museum, especially the big museums in Europe, to take a quick picture of themselves with the Mona Lisa or something and post it on Facebook. They were far less interested in actually examining the piece of art, having some experience with it. Their focus and dominant focus was to take the picture, grab the next picture, post it on Facebook, and get out of there. So that would not be getting out of animality. I think that would still be animality because, again, the focus is on the dominance instinct of showing, in that scenario, I'm wealthy enough to go to European vacations, I'm sophisticated, I can go to these museums, I appreciate these forms of art, look at me, how interesting and how cultured I am. That projects dominance. That's a form of projecting dominance. But contrast that with someone that quietly goes to a museum, doesn't tell anyone about it, just enjoys the day at the museum, and has that experience. That's not animality. They're not doing it for any reason other than they enjoy it. Now, another example would be have conversations with people that you wouldn't ordinarily have, and do it with people that the conversation couldn't really directly benefit you in any way or other, wouldn't have any upside to you. Just engage in conversation for the sake of conversation. Suppress the voice in the back of your mind that is always trying to ask, how can this person help me to get what I want out of life? How can I use them? How can I network them in some way? And suppress that voice and just enjoy the interaction with that person. Third, obviously one thing you could do to get out of animality is donate your money to a cause. Again, without publicizing it, telling everybody about it, just donate it. That would clearly be an example of your transcending animality, because you're actually reducing your monetary resources, which the survival instinct would say increase it. That would be maximizing it, but if you give it away, you're actually decreasing that resource. So that would be clearly not conduct that would be furthering the survival instinct. So that would be a good example. Another one would be interact with members of the opposite sex without any aggressive push or maneuvering in some way or another to engage in sexual activity with them, or even variations of that. Just interact for the purpose of, again, enjoying someone else's company, seeing someone else's different perspective, but don't try to constantly push this. If you're trying to push it and maneuver it and strategize it into how you're going to sleep with them or make out with them, again, you're back into animality and the instinct to reproduce and have sex. Wear nondescript clothes would be another one that don't show off your body, and thereby, again, reflecting your seeking to fulfill the animality instinct of sex. And don't wear clothes also that show off your wealth, which thereby show that you're trying to project and satisfy your dominance instinct, that you have more money than other people. So wear nondescript clothes like this that don't really reflect your body in any way, shape, or form, and don't show your wealth in any way, shape, or form, and that's it. Read and learn things, Plato, Aristotle, whatever. Read those books for pure mental enrichment. And don't publicize it, and just read them for your own enjoyment. Engage in volunteer work, again, without publicity. Just do it because you think it's good for you. It's good for your development. It's good for your giving back to people because you think it's right. Because you think you want to be a part of a city or a town where people know that other people care about each other and will do things, and will take some time to reflect that in action. So that would be another example of transcending animality. So there's a lot of them out there, actually. There's a ton of them. You just have to, I think, want to get out of this animality trap, I would call it, of just doing 80, 90, 95% of your time devoted to the satisfaction of those instincts. You just have to find a way to get out of it and slowly do one thing, do another, and see how that works out for you. I think once you do these things, you can finally, for the first time, compare how you feel involved in these activities versus how you feel when you're primarily day after day engaged in behavior that is in servience and in bondage to the animal instincts. I think you'll notice a world of difference between the two types of behaviors and the two different approaches to things, and I think you'll be very pleasantly surprised by the difference. So that will be the end of tonight's post, and I will hopefully have a lot of thoughts in August I can share. Bye-bye.